All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone. My name is Masood Rahman and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I need a volunteer to go ahead and type in yes in the questions pane if you can hear me loud and clear. So I want to make sure everybody can hear me. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for joining here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solution. We're very excited to host today's technical webinar, How to Create a SharePoint Form. Please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic, and we offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored toward your specific requirements. If you're interested in further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultant through our website at www.netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you will get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. Okay, so let's get to the agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll very briefly talk about Netcom, who we are, what we do. I'll go over the go-to-webinar logistics. Then we will have our presenter, Shane Snips, talk about SharePoint, how to create forms. Then we'll get to some of the related topics that related courses that we offer here at Netcom. We'll talk about the promotions that is available for some of those courses. The last thing we will do is we will open a poll for you to get some more information from you, and we'll have the question and answer session, the questions that you will be asking during the webinar. Now let's talk about the logistics. We'll talk about Netcom here. Netcom Learning is an award-winning global leader in managed learning services, training, and talent development. We have trained over 90,000 professionals over the years, 10,000 plus corporate clients. We're Microsoft Worldwide Partner of the Year. 96% of our customers recommend us to others. Our instructor evaluation, which was one of the key components of our business, the evaluation rates to 8.6 out of 9. We were listed top 20 training company by trainingindustry.com. 1,500 plus IT, business, and soft skill courses available through us. We trained over 60%, or 80% of the Fortune 100 companies, and we have 20 plus leading vendor recognition. Our company was founded in 1998. We are headquartered in New York City, but we have the capability, or we do deliver training in all 50 states of United States and throughout the world. So we have the capability of deliver training throughout the world. Now let's get to the webinar logistics. To start with, you have the option to adjust the window size to your liking. Simply hit the escape key and find the zoom button on the top left corner. So if you hit the escape key, you can see the zoom button right here on the top left corner. Then you can drag down, from the drop down, you can select the percentage to fit in your screen. Now, everyone has been muted except for our presenter. Feel free to submit any questions that you have for the presenter here at the question pane, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. So this is the question pane, just like some of you have answered yes to the first question that I asked. You can go ahead and type in your question. We will address them at the end of the session. A PDF copy of today's slides are also available in the handout section of your GoToWebinar. So right under questionnaire, there is the handout section where you'll be able to find a copy of today's presentation. So if you want to download that, you can go ahead and do that. Now let me talk briefly about Shane Snips. Shane is a Microsoft certified trainer and also a Microsoft subject matter expert here at Netcom Learning. He has more than 19 years of experience in training, startup, nonprofit, education, and public sector. While working for Microsoft, he assisted the training launches for Microsoft Server 2008, Office 2007, Office 2010, Office for Mac, SharePoint 2013, and Office 365. So he has lots of experience with Microsoft product working in different industries, and he has been teaching for us for a very long period of time. So without any further delay, I'll now pass it over to Shen so he can go ahead and start his presentation. Then I'll come back and we'll take care of the other segment of this webinar. So Shen, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Shane Snipes, and thank you so much for the introduction there. It's always great to get some information out to people about technologies. I try to make them as approachable as possible. I know it can be difficult sometimes with people when they're working with SharePoint. There's so many tools inside of it. And what I want to do today is I want to spend a little time simplifying the process of making forms and using forms inside of SharePoint. I do find that a lot of folks, once they have stepped into the space of using forms and let their teams know about some of the simple ways of using forms, it can simplify that process. And I am a big believer in doing it through practice. So what you're going to see today in this webinar is SharePoint forms in a couple of different contexts. First, we're going to talk about what are SharePoint forms and how actually diving into the components of InfoPath 2013 and how you can build with InfoPath a pretty robust form and make it easily accessible and easily publishable into SharePoint. Now, any of these things you could sort of DIY or do it yourself, and that's one way to start learning about the SharePoint form process. And then through that, of course, Netcom is a great place to go to build on those skill sets that you might be practicing on your own. So whenever you think about SharePoint forms, it's always good to remember that this is actually just pushing information into SharePoint and giving you a nice template over top of it. So SharePoint forms aren't going to perform any particular magic other than connecting a SharePoint library or SharePoint list back to a form. And we can customize those forms. We can make them with specific fields, and I'll show you how to do that today in this webinar. I like to talk about the ways that forms can be created, and it might be nice as a follow-up, and you might look for this in the webinar options here at Netcom. How do you create, for example, custom form templates? And that might be a future subject that we talk about. And whenever we get into the basics of forms, you will start to understand that you can go into this space with a lot of technical knowledge and still not necessarily be able to use the tools inside of InfoPath. So I'll give you that brief intro, and I'll also allow you to do some of the other types of demonstrations that are part of what we have inside of SharePoint. Now today, the great news is I will be using Microsoft InfoPath Designer, and 2013 is the version I'm using. You'll be able to do that. You'll see some screenshots on my slides here that I'll be using only as a reference. Almost everything I'm doing I will do with live demos and talking through how to apply them back to the SharePoint environment. The other part about my work is I like to use the most recent version of SharePoint. So here you're going to see, for example, that I'm inside of SharePoint, inside of Office 365, and my Office 365 environment is the easiest way for me to think for mid-sized and certainly for small businesses, but for mid-sized businesses to get into the space of storing information quickly and easily using forms inside of SharePoint. And you can do that with just a few clicks. Gone are the days when you would have to be a specialist just to take advantage of the power of SharePoint. They've come a long way with it, and my SharePoint webinars really take a little time too in exploring that, because oftentimes people find that whenever they're getting into SharePoint, they're sort of wrapped up in the context of it, right? But here is a public group that would be part of a corporate environment inside of SharePoint, and because it's a group, it allows me to create all kinds of things inside of this. And the basic building blocks of SharePoint are a list, a document library, a page, and an app. So each of those pieces are things that relate back to what we're talking about today in different ways. And I'll talk about how those components really do relate back. You'll notice in the last 2 years, SharePoint Online has changed and become simpler and have a lot more tools that you can use like this. Whenever you're talking about creating a form, one of the easiest ways to create a form, if you're not inside of InfoPath, is simply to create a list. And when you create that list and you start building the fields, it will allow you to have a form available to the people that you want to complete the list or to complete entries inside of it. So let's say, for example, we wanted to do an event registry, right? Registration. All right, so event registration is one thing that we might have. And we could say this is annual board of directors meeting. All right, so let's give it some real context here. When I hit create, it will immediately add the link to this list over on the left-hand side here inside of SharePoint. And at the same time, it gives me ways to quick and easily add columns to this list that we have. So it basically looks like a spreadsheet, right? When I hit this plus sign here, it's going to allow me to add different types of content into this form, and that will give me ways for us to move forward. So if I did a single line of text here, I would say first name, and then the other option is to add right here, last name. And here's one over here that we've got that's already got a field in it, and we can edit that away here in a moment. But for the sake of this, I'm going to go into the column settings, and you'll notice how quick and easily I can rename this. So I can actually just call this event title. So event title is then added. I can resize these columns to make it easier for me to see everything in the screen, and that just gives me more tools that we can work with. The last thing I might say is date of arrival, right? So I'm going to add a date here, and it's going to be date of arrival. I'll hit create. All right, so I've got a couple of different fields here that I built inside of this form, very basic event registration. When I'm ready to go and make changes to this form or add a new one, I click the New button here. And the New actually adds a new entry into the form. So here's my form right in front of the person. Title, first name, last name, date of entry, and then it'll give me a way to reorganize that. And I'll show you some other tools that you can do to continue to tweak this form. But this is literally the location that you can use to create a new form entry. One of the great things about a tool like this is if I copy this URL, which is at the top up here, so if I go to this and I copy it, and then I go to a web browser, or I put this into an email, and I enter it, it will allow me to then create a new entry point. So that's the easiest way for me to take a basic form that I've created inside of SharePoint and actually push it out to people to have them fill it out. And then when they hit save, it will add that in there. So let's say for the sake of this, we're saying Board of Directors meeting, and then here, this is Thomas, Edwards. Date of arrival for him would be the 27th. And then if he needed to do an attachment, we could add additional attachments here. So let's say he was going to add his form with all of his selections for his events, if he wanted to do that. Or maybe he has additional materials for his speech that he's going to give. So then I'd hit save in this, and it's going to take me into that listing. So that's a quick and easy way for me to add these sorts of things directly into a form. So it may seem like that they're really complicated ways to build forms, and InfoPath will certainly give you a lot of variety, almost infinite variety as far as form development. This is a really straightforward and easy way for folks to create forms inside of InfoPath or inside of SharePoint. And I wanted to start there because I feel like when people think about forms, they often think about what they want to accomplish with them. And I always go back to, what do you want to do with the information in the form? So if I quick edit, it will allow me to go into these form fields and make changes to them and update them more easily. So this is a board of directors meeting. This is the title. I can rename that column, which I've already done. Let's say I wanted to call this what we originally talked about, which was event name. So now that's in the space there. This gives us an easy way to make that change without us having to do other things. The other thing it allows us to do is, whenever I'm ready to add a new field, let's say I go in and I say I need to add another text field that is event session choice. All right, so I've done event session choice. This is where the person chooses which event session. They're actually going to enter it themselves here. They're not going to do a pull-down menu. We'll do a pull-down menu inside of InfoPath. This is a different example here. But you can see that I've been able to add this into the field. And then if, for example, I've added this and a couple of people have already registered, but they send me emails and they say, I want to go to the finance session, then you can add that into the data that you would have inside of this form. So it changes it inside the list itself. So when I'm clicked done, I have this updated version of my event list, and I'm able to organize it that way. And then, of course, you have the ability to edit your views, which is also pretty helpful whenever you're talking about the actual information that you create in a form. I can go in and I can now edit views of what this particular one is going to look like, which fields are going to show up, what's the order of the fields, and where it's going to be stored as well. So I have all of this in here. And these look a lot more, for those of you guys who are familiar with the SharePoint environment, this is back to sort of your normal view of SharePoint. It's got a few more choices of things that you can actually walk through and see. So that gives you ways to customize this or present even more fields on the backside. So those columns that you see that aren't checked off, the ones that aren't displayed here, they're actually simply fields that are standard inside of SharePoint and that don't necessarily need to be shown up, but they could be collected on the back end of whatever is entered inside of it. So then when I click OK, I've just had that opportunity to see what that actual field looks like. I can also filter it. I can sort by any of these carets here at the top. So if I need to sort by first name, last name, I can do that. And then once again, if I need to activate this list and pull it out, I have that option to do it within it. There's some pretty excellent new tools inside of SharePoint that allow you to, and I just want to peek at these because I want to introduce you to the options that you're going to have in future webinars, where you can actually create a flow so that once an event registration is entered, something else happens. And I don't have to be a pro to make that flow happen. So I could, once something is done, I could go and have this field then be sent to someone for approval or to have additional things happen. So it takes new entry items into your list as the form entry, and it gives you those options of things that you might want to create as a flow. So that's a little bit beyond the scope of this class, but I like to show people that the evolution of SharePoint is pretty robust. Each quarter that passes, they introduce additional things like this. And flow is just one of them. And it's another way of thinking about workflows. So they've simplified and shortened the concept of workflows as a label here and are using it with specific flows that apply to a list, in this case the event registration. So that's just one way to think about this, these tools. When we do step back into the presentation here that I have for you, you'll notice I started talking with this concept of InfoPath. And I want to continue with that because InfoPath is a very powerful tool that you can use to build some basic forms or some very advanced forms. You don't have to be a super pro to begin with InfoPath, and you can build some easy forms and have them published into SharePoint. So let's talk about how we actually do that using an InfoPath, using InfoPath Designer. All right, so I'm going to step over here into InfoPath Designer. So this is InfoPath Designer, and it looks and feels kind of like any other application that is Office 2013 or higher. So it's got your regular tabs that we have here. It's got a File tab, which gives us the introductory components of InfoPath that allow us to do things like create forms from templates. It also gives us ways then to look at what we've recently created, to open another form. And those are some of the things that you have inside of any basic application. The other thing we have here are the other types of fields which come across at the top. So right now I haven't opened the form, I haven't started with a template yet because I wanted to give you a clean slate view of what InfoPath can do. So here I have the regular kind of cut and paste. Look, I have bolding components. My controls will load here in a moment, and I'll show you what those are. And then you have rules. So you can build things that check to make sure it's an email, check to make sure certain things happen. And those are all part of your the things that you have at your fingertips. So let's go ahead and go into File. And I'm just going, for the sake of this, to create a blank form. And then once I double click on it or click Design Form, I can do either. But if I click Design Form, it's going to open a basic box, a basic table with me with some text in it where I can enter additional information, enter the types of things that we're talking about. So let's say now that I wanted to do requests for time off. All right, so this is a request for time off form that might be built by an HR department so that they can keep track of these requests. I always tell people start with a table in a table because that'll give you more structure to your form and you won't have to worry about trying to line everything up yourself. So here's my first table right in front of me, and it gave me that table automatically. My second table is actually just like before. Notice how these things have now become active. So I have these capabilities. I have the ability to insert all kinds of things into my form. So if I wanted, for example, to go in here and I could create another, just like in Word or Excel, I could create another cell or split a cell or insert a column below or above, insert a row below or above. I'm going to insert another row below this one So this is just treating it just like another table right now. That's all I'm working with, is tables within tables. So what we'll do here is we'll start out with one of these pre-formatted tables, because it gives us a nice starting point. And I'm going to choose this second one from the right. When I choose that, it's going to give me some space to work around. So I've got here these spaces, and I have more places to add more text. And I would say here, enter your requests for vacation below. I have labels, so over here are the text that I would use, and over here are what are called controls. So let's go over what a control is. Oftentimes we get wrapped up in working inside of InfoPath, and we don't necessarily know that what we're actually doing is we're creating database or list fields. And so a control is just going to give us specific ways of presenting that field to the user. When we're looking at fields then, we have over here on the right-hand side, you'll notice in this screenshot, a list of fields. And you're going to see my list of fields grow as I expand my report. You can see on this screen right here, I've got an expense report that's got several different types of fields in it. The other thing that you have as an option is the ability to access and work with different areas. I mentioned to you before that you have a quick access ribbon at the top, and your quick access toolbar above that is where you can do certain things like save things very quickly, undo, or have other types of features. This is where the title, of course, pops up, known inside of Microsoft circles and a lot of other circles too. If you're working in productivity applications, this is called a title bar. Over here we have the form area, and this is where the form actually shows up, and then a status bar down at the bottom. So those are the basic building blocks that we just covered. Now InfoPath Filler, for those of you guys who want to know the difference between InfoPath Designer and InfoPath Filler is a basic InfoPath application that you can install if you're running SharePoint Foundation. So if you're running SharePoint Foundation, InfoPath forms cannot be completed in SharePoint. That means you need the InfoPath Filler application on any computer that receives or tries to click on that InfoPath form. That will allow that form to be filled out and completed and returned back. So if you're using SharePoint Foundation in a local server environment, then this would apply to you. If you have a subscription to SharePoint online, then you don't have to worry about this particular piece of this particular concern, because your SharePoint will in fact allow you to use InfoPath forms. Now, when we look at the components of the designer, it's very similar. So you have some similarities. Notice on the right-hand side over here, the only thing we've added is this section called Resizable Task pane. That means I can move this little bar, if I was in the live version, to the right a little bit to make more space to use my real estate differently. So this is a resizable task pane. And that can be a helpful thing to keep in mind whenever you're working inside of InfoPath. We talked about Backstage, and so the Backstage view is simply this File tab. And the File tab has all kinds of functions inside of it. One of the most important functions that we'll get to in a moment is the publishing function. This allows me to then have the ability to push my form and publish it live onto SharePoint. And you also have different options for how you want to submit your form. So whether you want it to be sent back via email or whether you want it to be submitted onto a website, there are several options that you have. And I'll show you these components here in a moment once we have an active form in the running, which we've already started building. Okay, so this is one of the form starters that you see in front of you here, and it's got some fields that automatically came into it. And there are a lot of different form templates. I like to either take someone else's InfoPath form if something is built internally and restructure it, because then there's a familiarity to it. Or if need be, of course, you can build your own like we're doing here in this webinar. But there are form templates or form environments that you can go to. So if we step back into our actual InfoPath Designer, you'll notice I'm back in my table within a table. I have within this section name. Let's say I want to put that, and then I also want to have department. I'll put, I need some more spaces here. So I'm going to select this entire row by putting my pointer right on the edge, and see how my pointer became a black arrow. That allows me to select the whole row. I can then right-click on it, and it'll call up the insert option, and I would insert a row above it, right? So that's some options that you have. The other way that you can do this is if you go to Table Tools. Now, just like in Word or PowerPoint or any other Office application, whatever I'm currently clicked inside of, and I'm currently inside of a table, I have contextual menus that pop up. And this contextual menu is layout for tables. Because I'm in a table, it gives me the option of what I want to do. So now all of a sudden I have very quick ways to do what I was doing before, which is if I needed to insert another one below, I can do it very quickly using these kinds of buttons here. So always take note of what menus pop up when you're inside of things. All right, so it allows me to add these other fields in here. I'm able to choose date of vacation, start, date of vacation, end. All right, so I have those two things I can put in there. Now I'm building my controls out from here. Gives me ways of doing it. My controls I still haven't put in yet. I'm just doing some basic text. And then I can say supervisor. Let's say, for the sake of this, we want to go ahead and enter that person's name into it. And I'll show you a pretty neat tool that you can use to actually find those people who are part of your Active Directory inside of this example. So you'll be able to select your supervisor inside of that space. Great. And then that's what you have for those pieces. Now what we want to do is we want to go back over here to the Home tab, and I want to call up my controls. Now there's a little shortcut that we have. Anytime we're using these task sections, anytime that happens, we have the ability to go through our material in that way. And one of the things that it allows us to do is if I have an area here where it's controls, and I click on this little arrow here in the lower right-hand corner of the control section, it's actually going to pull that menu into my task bars. So now I have these task sections over here where I can control and have access to the material. I can see all of my controls. So let me tell you what a control is. A control is a different type of format that you're entering into a SharePoint list or library. If I wanted to enter a name, I would use my task box. If I wanted to enter, let's say I had a selection of things that I wanted folks to choose from, I would choose the drop-down list. If I wanted them to have a checkbox, I would choose that one. Combo box allows me to do several things at once. And then an option button is different than a checkbox because with an option button, I can only pick one thing. So it's like a radio button. I only get to choose one option of a list, and the list is all visible to me. So these are some of the options that we have within this. And then what we're going to do within this example here is we're just going to make several different choices for folks and several different types of input. When I click and drag my text box into the space and let go of it, notice that it automatically names it field 1. So it told it to be field 1. It also automatically gave it a tag above it as text. So see this little text section? I don't need that because I've already put it in the other section, so I'm going to delete that for the purposes of this activity. When I double click on this white box, it automatically opens this menu right here at the top, this properties menu. It automatically opens it for me, and it gives me the choice right in this box to rename it. And I am going to name it after the fields, the labels that I have here. That'll make it easiest once I have it inside of SharePoint. So this gives me a way then to build that form very quickly. Department, again, I could use a drop-down list, and I'm going to choose a drop-down list here because I want to show you that that option gives us all kinds of ways to organize our content. Now, I'm just going to select the field 2 and delete that. And then I'm going to double-click on those choices. Notice right here is your button to edit the choices, but first we're going to rename it, department. So I'm going to abbreviate it for the purposes of my list. And then I'm going to choose edit choices. So now here are my choices down here. And that will allow me to add another choice here, which would be accounting. Add another one called facilities. And one more called human resources. Okay, so those are my 3 things that I've added. I'm going to click OK. And now those will be part of my selection box whenever I choose it later. So those are the ways that that shows up. And it gives me an easy way to organize that. The other thing I want to choose here for my next control is, you guessed it, I want to choose a date picker because I want them to not have to type it in and maybe enter their date wrong. I want them to have a date picker as the option. So I'm going to drag this into this box, change that, double click on the white box like I've been doing. That opens start underscore date. All right, so I'm naming it like I would a regular field. So I'm naming it start date. And I'm naming it back here, going to pick my date. If I put my cursor down there, notice that it automatically selected that in. I want to show you that little shortcut. So it added this field into it, and we don't need a 4th field, but I'm going to pull it in because it's already there. So I'll show you in the supervisor section what that looks like. When you have this section, notice that I can rename it from here. I can do a lot of the things that we're doing before. It is a date picker, so that's good. I can always choose that. It's going to give me another way to enter it. When I double click on it, we're going to do end underscore date. and that's going to give me an end date. So now I have my two fields, start and end date. The other thing I'm going to add here is one more person or group picker. But first I'm going to put my cursor where I want this field to be. So now watch this. This is another shortcut inside of InfoPath. If I double-click once on that, you'll notice it allows me to go in and choose emails. So this is where my supervisor can actually be entered into the system, and I can make it much easier if I use those flows that I showed you before. You can actually use it to provide that option and email that supervisor straight from the form. A little more advanced, but at least now the person has an option to choose that particular supervisor, and that's what we want to have happen. So what I've done here is I've created a really helpful, simple form that allows you to build these things. Now, everything that we've covered has been just in a couple of little areas, and this gives you your starting place for any of your forms. So I've built this form, and now I need to do something with it. So first thing we're going to do is save it, because it's going to ask me to save it. And I'm going to call this one Time Off. All right, so I've saved my form. The title is right up here. And the next thing I need to do is I need to actually publish this form. So there are several different options for the form submission to a SharePoint library, all kinds of different options here, to a web service, to a specific location. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a SharePoint library, because this is going to allow me to then push it into that specific location and actually provide that as a location for the forms to be entered into. So that's one way to do it. And I would choose a document library that is inside of SharePoint as my location. And what we would do here is I'm just going to switch over to my Internet Explorer. And notice here I'm inside of my items, and here I have a document library. So this document library is just called Documents. The web address is right here at the top. So all I want to do is I want to copy that document library into that web address into my form. So I'm going to right-click on it and copy it. And then I want to go back to my InfoPath, and I just want to put it into this document library location. And then it will add a file, a field into it. So for example, a status report. So if I want to add something into it, I would add it over top of it. Allow overwrites of files. No. So when I click Next, this is going to push that file into this document library. So set as the default submission connection. Yes. And then we'll hit Finish. All right, so the library or list is what's going to happen with this one, and then we have the option to check it. The other thing we want to do is we can check to see if our design works. So does the design have any errors? Verify on server. Let's provide the address. It goes out and makes sure. Refresh it. There are no errors or messages to check the template again. All right, so the errors, there were no errors in this particular form. I can close this section here. Don't need that anymore. And that's one way to publish. So then whenever I submit something or enter it, it's going to show up into that library. So that's one way to do a submission. Oftentimes, when we're doing forms, you can just hit enter and it'll do the submission for you. But I like to insert a submit button. So that's the only thing we have left here that I wanted to show you guys, is how do you create that submit button environment. Just like all the other options, I put my cursor where I want it, I click the button, and there's my submit button. Now, what do I want my submit button to do? I want it to submit to a specific location, or I want it to do a specific thing. Here, I'm just going to take this, just like in Word, center it. So I center my button, so it's right in the middle of my form. And then I want to make some properties and changes to my buttons. All right? What that does for me is it allows me to update my form. So I'm able to change form or update the things. When I choose Submit, it's going to allow me to choose what happens with this submit. So my submit actions are users to submit the form, send form to data to a single destination, the library, choose the connection, it's already set. So these are all things that I decided before. My submit button is then just reading off of what I've already decided. Right? So then when I click OK, I've got it. So here within this environment, I've been able to make it pretty easy and straightforward. I can click Preview to add it and see what it looks like. So here's what my form looks like, and I have the option to submit it. So inside of this, I can go Eric, Gregory, no. I'm going to choose within this, facilities. Here's my button for my date, next week, returning. You could do validation on this if you wanted to, but that's for a more advanced webinar. And then lastly, I want to pick a person so I can check names, or I can go through a directory. So it'll go out and it'll look inside of my directory, and assuming I'm connected to my Active Directory, as you would be if you're logged into your network, you would be able to see people in your group. Here I'm just going to say Greg Kinston, and I would hit Submit. All right, so that is going to then allow us to push it over. Person or field, no exact match found, and that would happen. The good news is, I wanted to show you this part, because whenever you see, let's say you wanted the workflow to work correctly and you had to verify that the person's name was in there, then that would work for it, right? Now, if I wanted to have a generic supervisor text box, I could have done it just like Gregory. This one's actually doing a verification for us and going out to check to make sure it actually happens. So I'm going to close my preview. And then I'm going to show you what I would do here to make it super simple. And that is, I would add a text box. I would rename this field and call it supervisor. Click OK. So there's my supervisor. And I've got this built to preview. And I would hit preview. It's going to pop up again. And Tim Robs, Human Resources, start date, very similar. He's going the 27th, coming back on the 1st. Supervisor is Harry Smith. Submit, identify this potential problem. What am I doing? I'm communicating right now across the internet, and I'm about to send something over to this database or to this location. And then it's going to push it over and make that happen. So the goal with those is, you'll notice it's connecting back and it's pushing it over into that particular location. So now when we go here and I reload, it will take that information, present it, and there's my form entry. So this gives me a new way of doing it. Now, the other fantastic thing about SharePoint is I have the ability here to look at the material that's inside of my document library and experience a little differently. It does things like it allows you to add tags very quickly, which can be helpful, and it allows you to update views very quickly as well. So this is just walking you through some of those things that you'd be able to organize with the things that you have in front of you. And that's a helpful thing to keep in mind whenever you're talking about lists. I'm able to grab different bits of information and add them to the sections that I need. So that's a helpful thing to keep in mind whenever we have a SharePoint example like this, where we're looking at an overall team site and I'm creating forms for that kind of purpose. Now the other type of form that we have, and the good news is I can take this same form and I can do the same type of analysis with it, or same type of submission. All I have to do is go back to this section and go, what are my submit options? So what do I want to do with this? How do I want to submit it? Maybe I want to submit it over to a document library, a connection, a SharePoint document library versus others. Here's my submission that's already done for me, and I have that right at my fingertips. When I go to publish, now here's an interesting thing about publishing. So right now I've had a local version of this. And also notice, because I'm in Office 365, I can publish the form to a list of email recipients. This can be extremely helpful. So what this does is it allows you to then fill out those pieces. Now notice users need to have that InfoPath filler as part of it, unless they're using a local version, version of SharePoint other than Foundation. Email will work without the filler notation there. So let me choose SharePoint Server here, because I do want to show you how you can take a location and it will allow you to create a new SharePoint site. So here's my team site, and I'm going to copy that location. So we always start, I don't try to remember my URLs or any of that. I just go to the team site where I want this form to be located, and I copied that web address, and then I paste it right straight into this field. It goes out and looks for the field, and then it tells me that I'm going to build your form library for you. So this is where all of your forms, submissions are going to be held. So that's where I would make this choice for form library and then click next. It will go out. It will say, do you want me to use a current form library, a form library that you already have, or what should I do here? And this is where I would say I'm going to go ahead and use a new one. So for the sake of this, this is a class sample because that's what I'm building. And all the different columns are the fields that are actually available to me. So what I did here is I clicked Add. Because remember, the only way my form library is going to remember what was submitted in my form is if I tell it which ones to look at. So here I would choose name, I would add department, I would add start date, and I would add end date. And lastly, of course, I want to add the supervisor. All right, so there's my fields that I have, and I can click Next. And this is what will happen. It tells me where it's about to go, where it's about to publish to, and then it pushes that form over into that location and publishes it for me. And this is the way that SharePoint makes making forms, as long as you use it like any other environment. This is what makes forms pretty helpful. It tells me it was published successfully, and then I can go into that form library, and actually my form is here and available to me. So when I click New, it's going to tell me that I'll be able to add this into that form section and create a new form entry per section built. And that's the way the form really builds and gives you an opportunity to make form entries pretty straightforward and simple for the different sections that you're working on. I did receive one question. I'd like to transition over right now to get some additional questions from you guys. But I know there is one question that was already posed that I have, and I'll read that question to you if there are no other questions that pop up right away. But let's do a quick transition, because there's only about 6 minutes left in the class, and this will give you an opportunity to ask me some questions if there's anything posed into the chat section there or the question box.
Thank you, Shane. Just want to quickly go over one thing before we get, or two things before we get to the questions. Want to quickly talk about the training because some of the questions might be related to the courses or what courses might be helpful for our attendees to learn more about what you just covered. So I wanted to talk about those. We have a special promotion for the recommended courses below for our webinar attendees. The courses that we have here available is Planning and Administrating SharePoint 2016. The class is scheduled for March the 13th. Then Advanced Technologies of SharePoint 2016, that is scheduled for March 20th. The last course, which I think would be more related to the topics that we just covered today, Microsoft SharePoint 2016 for site owners and power users, and that course is available on May 4th. The promo code that you need to use for this 15% discount would be WMSP0216, and this offer is valid till March 3rd, 2017. Now, next thing I'll do is I would be launching a quick poll to see how many of you might be interested in taking taking courses with us now or near future. So if you can quickly do the poll. In the meantime, keep those questions coming. I'm just waiting for more questions to pop up so that we can go ahead and address them all together. In addition, we have more informative webinars coming up. Please go to www.netcomlearning.com/webinar to register. Also, please follow our social media pages to get latest technology updates. Please refer to the GoToWebinar chat windows for links. Now, let's get to some of those questions that we have. Now, one of the questions that I have here on the question pan is that, can you slowly demonstrate how to get the SharePoint library path again? So, Shane, can you quickly talk about it one more time so that they can understand it again?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, just so you guys can kind of see where I'm coming from with that one, when we're talking about any kind of library path, we're really just talking about the website up here. So that's my location. Now, before I built one called Event Registration, and that was one place that we built it. Now, I could go up to the web address, and that's where I want to start. If I have a general SharePoint team site, and I just want to publish into that team site, remember, you're going to need a team site domain level in order to publish any kind of form onto SharePoint. You cannot publish it into the highest level of SharePoint, in other words. You need to get at the team site level, and then once you're at the basic team site level, all I have to do is take this web address, which is right up here at the top, copy it. So if I right-click, I'm going to get the copy and paste option. I would copy it, and then I would actually just go back into InfoPath, and that's where I would put it in. So if I wanted to do a publish, I would do in that space and enter that URL on that space. Now I've already had this set to do publishing for this one, and I could reset this piece, but I think the easiest thing to remember whenever you're talking about this location is that's how you get your actual URL. It's most important that you remember you must be at your team site location in order for you to be able to do that kind of publishing. Once you have that in, you can go to your site contents, and it will actually give you a listing of all the things that you've created. So remember, I created that 1, 2, 3 class sample. So that was one of my SharePoint libraries, and I could go to that particular library, and I could pull it up and copy it from there if I wanted to publish back into a specific SharePoint library or add to an existing SharePoint form library. So that's how the URLs can easily be gathered. The only other question I got, which I just wanted to briefly answer, was when people are talking about using InfoPath, I always recommend that people, start with a very basic form. So if you do have that option and you have the availability to work with an existing form, it's the best way to do it when you're first starting out. And also remember the distinction between whether you want people to fill it out on a web page, like inside of SharePoint, in an email, which would be InfoPath Filler, or actually receive it and then have to use InfoPath Filler. So there are a couple ways that you can do it. The easiest then would be the blank form that would be published out into SharePoint. All right, that's the session. We're up. It's 2 o'clock already. I know time has already flown by. It was really great to have everyone on the webinar here today. I hope it's useful to folks who listen to it later. And thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Shane. And I also want to thank all of you for joining here us today. And if you come up with any additional question, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time, and we'll get back with you with the answers from Shane here. So with that, I would like to conclude our webinar today. I want to thank you once again, everyone joining. We hope that you found today's session informative, and we look forward to see you soon in other webinars that we have coming up. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinar and courses. If you need any information about any training, feel free to reach out to our learning consultants. Informations are also available on our website. You can chat with our learning consultants online, and we also have consulting service that is available. So if you think you need someone to go out to your facility and we help you with those, we could do that as well. So with the training consulting, we can pretty much be your solution provider. So that kind of concludes our webinar today, and I'll stop the session at this point. Thank you.